Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So an historic event happened this past September, but I got distracted by asteroids, eclipses, and giant sea spiders, so I didn't get the chance to cover it. But today, that shall be remedied, because Frank Rubio just broke the record for the longest time spent in space by an American. Over a year. 371 days. That is a super long time. Crazy long time not to be on this planet, but this whole thing was an accident. For those of you who've been watching my channel for a bit, you'll know that I mentioned Frank Rubio about 9 months ago when I did my Rescue in Space video, and how he and the 2 cosmonauts he was traveling with never intended to be on the International Space Station as long as they were. So I feel obligated to cover the conclusion of this crazy story and the amazing record that it has set. So yeah, let's get into it. So as I discussed in my original video, American astronaut Frank Rubio arrived on the International Space Station with Russian cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitry Petelin aboard the Soyuz space capsule MS-22 on September 21st, 2022. That's a lot of 22s. This mission is part of the partnership that NASA has with Roscosmos, the Russian version of NASA. So this crew was due to be aboard the ISS for 6 months and then come home, when in March of this year, this happened. This is a radiator leak spewing coolant from the Soyuz after being struck by a micrometeoroid. And as I said back then, when this is what you see from your ride home in space, that's pretty stressful. And it basically made the spacecraft unrepairable, and thusly, it was not going to be taking anybody home. So without trying to be too dramatic about it, they were kind of stranded. So the plan was to send that Soyuz back home unmanned, and then send up another Soyuz, which was not leaking coolant, back up to the ISS to take them home. So they were able to get the new Soyuz MS-23 up there, but because all of these missions and launches and re-entries are scheduled so tightly, even though they had their ticket back home, they couldn't exactly punch it. Scheduling conflicts basically kept them up there for another 7 months. And with that, an unexpected opportunity to learn more about prolonged spaceflight on the human body. During his mission, Rubio completed approximately 5,936 orbits of Earth, which equates to about 157 million miles, or 328 trips to the moon and back, according to NASA. He also carried out 3 spacewalks, which totaled about 21 hours, and had 28 different crewmates on the ISS. Rubio conducted a variety of scientific experiments during his extra time, including testing how bacteria behaves in microgravity. But his favorite experiments were apparently taking care of and growing tomatoes on the ISS, which I find very adorable. And in the end, after launching on September 21st, 2022, Frank Rubio and his cosmonaut pals finally landed back in Kazakhstan on September 27th, 2023. 371 days later, the longest time an American astronaut has lived in space. The previous record was held by Mark Vande Hei of 355 days and Scott Kelly of 340 days. This record-setting trip was more than twice as long as originally scheduled. Frank and company were pulled out of their Soyuz capsule and carried away because they were unable to walk due to their extended stay in microgravity. And in fact, studying Frank Rubio as he readjusts to life on Earth is a big part of this happy accident. Prolonged time in space can cause muscle degeneration, bone loss, reduced eyesight, impaired balance, and even change the shape of the brain. This recent record-breaking mission was Rubio's first time in space, meaning his body hadn't experienced any of these things before. It was like 0 to 100, and it is thought that it could take him 2 to 6 months to feel completely normal again. And Frank truthfully admits that if he had known this is how long he was going to be gone, he might not have signed up for the mission. In a recent interview with CNN, Frank said that if he had known that the assignment was going to be twice as long, he, quote, probably would have declined the assignment. Though he did admit it was mostly due to family things that had been going on this past year, which is completely fair, and Rubio is hardly a shirker. He's a medical doctor and an accomplished U.S. Army helicopter pilot and has flown combat missions in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He was selected to join NASA in 2017, and this was actually his first mission. But in an interview just before he left ISS, he admitted that he tried very hard to stay positive during his extended mission. You try to just focus on the job and on the mission and remain steady, because ultimately, every day, you have to show up and do the work. Good man, Frank. And even at 371 days, Frank is not the all-time record keeper of most consecutive days spent in space. That goes to Valery Polyakov, a Russian cosmonaut who spent 437 days on the Mir station in the mid-90s. His mission was actually to study more of the mental health and cognitive functions of human beings in space, which I think is a pretty fair question. And overall, he performed very well on these tests, which really set the groundwork for the idea that long periods in space, like what we would need to go to Mars, is something that is actually pretty doable. Now, granted, our trip to Mars is going to be more like over 1,000 days, and no one's done nearly that much time. And we still have these issues with muscle atrophy and osteoporosis. Astronauts have to exercise on the ISS 2.5 hours a day just to stay relatively normal. And even then, there is still significant muscle loss. Scott Kelly reported losing 7% of his body mass after he returned. And there's a whole host of other issues to the body that would take a whole other video in order to go through. But to date, we now have 4 NASA astronauts that have each spent over 300 days in space, individually, both men and women. So if we are serious about going to Mars, we are going to have to slowly start upping those days in order to see what we're really dealing with. But there is no doubt that returning to Earth was a huge sigh of relief for Rubio. Up here, meaning the ISS, we kind of have the constant hum of machinery that's keeping us alive. And so I'm looking forward to just being outside and enjoying the peace and quiet. And if you're lucky enough to live in such spots, the Earth is very, very good at that. Okay, so that's the story of Frank Rubio and his incredible journey to the ISS and back again. I know in some ways it feels like a year is not really that long, but I think that's only when you're home. Do you guys ever notice, like when you travel or if you've ever done like a year abroad, that time really slows down? You really feel that year when you're not home. And so I would imagine when you're in space, not on Earth, you are really feeling that year. So, man, welcome back, Frank. Okay. That's it for now. Please welcome Frank back in the comments below, or say anything else you want. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.